Dang, you guys have been busy without me. You guys have done like 30 or something episodes without an appearance of everybody's favorite hoodie guy. Well, I mean, it is a little odd to be wearing a hoodie in the middle of April. So maybe that's why you got shelved. Yeah, no, you raise a good point. It is a little warm to be wearing a hoodie in April. But I'm doing better than one of us. One more day before the storm. Oh yeah, he's losing his marbles right now. This shouldn't surprise anybody. I've got some mixed feelings about this one, but I'm going to celebrate anyway. Vegas Golden Knights win Game 81 of the regular season against the Seattle Kraken with a final score of 4-1. And to say it was a little bit of a shellacking of a potential playoff opponent would be an understatement. This game was never really in doubt. There was a couple of minutes there where the Golden Knights got off to a bit of a shaky start, and the Seattle Kraken were able to at least mount some semblance of offensive structure. But for large swaths of this game, it was all gold. It was definitely the great way to send off the Golden Knights' regular season home schedule, as this is game 41 at the Fortress. This was still a very critical matchup for the Golden Knights. There's a lot riding on these last couple of games. And this game in particular, this night had the potential to be one of the biggest nights for the Golden Knights this regular season. So the situation was Golden Knights win in any fashion against the Seattle Kraken, and the Edmonton Oilers lose in any fashion versus the Colorado Avalanche. The Golden Knights lock up the Pacific Division title, winning what would be their second divisional crown in as many years, in their 6 years of existence. So there was a lot riding on this game, but obviously the Golden Knights needed to focus on taking care of business. The goaltending matchup was not what every fan expected, with all the talk of Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson on the horizon and Jonathan Quick having a decent start against the Dallas Stars earlier in the week. It was thought that there was to be a little bit more goaltending controversy, but from the Golden Knights' perspective, it was pretty straightforward. It was Laurent Brossoit all the way, and he definitely put up a very good start in all facets. He's played very well recently. He's yet to lose in regulation this year, and now his 9 starts. And he'd be going up against the Coachella Valley Firebirds starting goalie, LARPing as the Seattle Kraken starting goalie in the form of Joey Decord. And Philip Grubauer and Martin Jones, who I would have loved to have seen, and don't say it. You mean the technically sound Martin Jones. I didn't want to say it. You said it for me. Thank you. Yeah. So Philip Grubauer and Martin Jones were both unavailable for this game. So Joey Decord gets the net. It's his 4th start of the year, and he hasn't put up the greatest numbers in the world. And it definitely showed that he's not quite ready for the NHL, as it didn't take long for the Golden Knights to jump out to a quick 1-0 lead in the first period in the form of Michael Amadio, who's just having another revival, which is a strong season. He's played really well, especially in the last 10 games as of late. He's been one of the strongest players on that second line with William Karlsson and Riley Smith. And this was definitely a line play. In Amadio, he focused on the breakout in the defensive zone, got the puck to Karlsson. Karlsson took the puck into the zone and just kind of found Amadio in a soft spot on the weak side. Everybody had shaded over to the goalie's left to try and cover the play, and Amadio kind of sat back post and was there for what would have been a tap-in, but I think he may have pushed it a little bit, because instead of going far post on Decord, he decided to say, you know what, that's not interesting enough. I'm going to go between his legs. And so he went between the legs, and against any other goalie, that probably doesn't work because they close off the bottom of the net. But it worked against this goalie, and so the Golden Knights go ahead 1-0. And at that point, I'm thinking, okay, cool, this is awesome. We're going to run away with this game. And then a few minutes later, Riley Smith makes a little bit of a mistake in the neutral zone, and his D partners all go for a line change, which sends Yanni Gordon on essentially a breakaway from the blue line in, and he snaps it above the blocker of Laurent Brossoit to knot the game up at 1. And fortunately for the Golden Knights, that is where the game would stay. It got a little bit interesting later on in the first period, as they decided in their eternal wisdom that it would be a good idea to take a penalty with 3 minutes to go in the period. But with a really successful kill, I don't even think they surrendered a shot. They were able to waltz into the first intermission with the game knotted up at 1, and then all go consequently check their phone to see what the score of the Edmonton-Colorado game was. Shocker, it was 1-1 at the time. So both games that we cared about at the time were sitting at 1-1. Historically, the second period has been the Golden Knights' weakest period, especially throughout this entire regular season, when we were at one point the best first period team and the best third period team and the worst second period team. That has kind of changed in the last few weeks, especially with the Golden Knights being able to hold on and extend leads in the second period. And oddly enough, this was a second period that really kind of echoed more to the more recent second periods the Golden Knights have had, as opposed to the second periods they had, say, before Christmas. Golden Knights came out and they were just on another level. They were kind of shutting down the play. The Kraken weren't really able to muster very much. They didn't have many shots on goal, especially in the early going. And consequently, pressure leads to more pressure, leads to mistakes, leads to opportunities. And in this case, leads to Mike Amadio's second goal of the night, second goal in a row for the Golden Knights. It was another play very similar to how he scored his first goal, just a little bit more on a fast break. I believe it was Riley Smith fed him a puck through the low slot, and he tipped it just behind the back post in on Joey Decord. Again, just another play, another smart heads-up play from a fellow line mate of Amadio's, and he was in the right place at the right time to receive a perfect pass, a perfect centering feed, and tip it in what was essentially a wide-open net. Now, Michael Amadio almost got to have his hat trick. Later on in the second period, the game had started to open up a little bit. The neutral zone was a little bit of a war zone for the Golden Knights, which I know Bruce Cassidy is not a huge fan of. But in this case, when you're playing the Seattle Kraken, who oddly enough have a very high power, high octane offense, you'd be concerned about it going the other way. But because of their high octane offense and the fact that they were down 2-1 at the time, they kind of got caught pressing. And this wound up being that Michael Amadio, again, was able to essentially get in on a breakaway, which is just nuts. This is Michael Amadio we're talking about. We picked him up off of waivers in November of last year, and he has become indispensable in the Golden Knights lineup nowadays. He gets in behind the defenseman and is able to put a pretty solid shot on Decord. Unfortunately, he went from the forehand to the backhand, and I thought he scored. I thought he got the hat trick. I thought the hats were going to come raining down in the final home game of the year, but unfortunately, Decord was there with the right pad. Unfortunately for Seattle Kraken and for Seattle Kraken fans, all the defensemen decided to just stand there and stare at the puck and be like, oh, he made the save. Now what? And what happened next was Riley Smith doing Riley Smith things, being behind the play, picking up the loose change, and hitting basically the 6x4 opening that Decord had left wide open by being laid down flat on his stomach to put the Golden Knights up 3-1. And mercifully, that is where the game would settle after a while. It kind of fell into a rhythm of a traditional Golden Knights multi-goal lead, especially a multi-goal lead of the last 7 games. We're not going to talk about the stretch before that where they were giving up multi-goal leads like they were going out of style, but this was a very dominant, very lock-it-down second period for the Golden Knights from that point on, and I honestly am very impressed with the way that the Golden Knights were able to essentially put the game out of reach without needing to score another goal. So the third period would begin with the Golden Knights still up 3-1, and in the second intermission, when looking at the scores again, the Oilers and Avalanche were still tied at 1, so the Golden Knights had to make sure they took care of their own business, and they kind of got a shove in the right direction when one of the strangest things that I knew could always happen in hockey, but I can't for the life of me remember the last time I saw it happen. 2 Seattle Kraken players took separate penalties at the same time on the same play. So, yeah, that's just essentially a free 5-on-3 power play for the Golden Knights. And especially with the way that our lineup has been right now and the struggles our power play has had, I almost didn't think we were going to muster anything. And mercifully, Jonathan Marchessault so proved me wrong, as he essentially just took a point shot that was, I believe, shot by Alex Pietrangelo, kind of bobbled around in the low slot, and it found his way to him wide open, essentially on the back post where Eichel usually stands on the power play, and he was able to roof it, no doubt, behind Decord again, putting the Golden Knights up 4-1. And it was around about this time in the game that I decided to say to myself, okay, this game is locked up. I'm not going to worry about anything. And so I decided to turn on the Edmonton-Colorado game right as the Colorado Avalanche went to the power play. And I figured, okay, they're at home. It's late in the game. They're going to score. And then they didn't score. And so that game went to overtime, which meant that, yeah, obviously the Golden Knights need to take care of business, which means that the odds of them winning the Pacific Division tonight went down dramatically because everybody knows how Edmonton gets when they get to 3-on-3 overtime. And whenever you give the Oilers a power play in overtime, as the Colorado Avalanche should know better by now, not to give Jesus McHockey a power play. And honestly, the Oilers, it was a foregone conclusion. They made him pay for it. The Oilers winning 2-1 in overtime. And with that backdrop, knowing that it would come down to game 82 to decide the Pacific Division crown, I tuned back into the Golden Knights game just in time to watch them finish wiping the floor with the Seattle Kraken and locking up the 4-1 win, securing 2 critical points in the Pacific Division and Western Conference races for the Stanley Cup playoffs. So as it stands now, the Golden Knights sit at 109 points, with their last game being the back end of the home-and-home with the Seattle Kraken in Seattle. So obviously this is a good step, obviously winning the first side of a home-and-home. We already swept a home-and-home series with the Minnesota Wild in the last couple of weeks, so we've got that going for us. But what's interesting is the fact that every team in the Pacific Division pretty much still has something to play for. The Oilers' next game is against the San Jose Sharks, and no offense to the Sharks, they're not going to put up enough of a resistance to take a point off of the Edmonton Oilers, let alone beat them in regulation. So it looks like the Golden Knights are going to have to get at least 1 point against the Seattle Kraken on Thursday. What's interesting is the fact that, if with our eyes turned towards the playoffs start of next week, as it stands right now, there are 3 possible opponents for the Golden Knights. One of them being the Winnipeg Jets. That assumes that the Golden Knights win their next game, which would lock up not only the Pacific Division, but also the Western Conference crown, Winnipeg being locked in as the second wild card. So that's opponent number 1, which is a decent option, but I'm not going to try and play matchmaker. The last time I got excited about a potential playoff matchup, it was the Stanley Cup semifinal 2 years ago against the Montreal Canadiens, and we all know how that went. The other options for opponents are 2 divisional foes in the form of, surprisingly, the Seattle Kraken. If they were to win and the LA Kings were to lose, I believe they win the tiebreaker and would get 3rd. And I'm assuming for the moment that the Oilers are going to beat San Jose. That would move the Golden Knights down to 2nd, and we would have home ice advantage over the Seattle Kraken. And the third matchup is the Golden Knights and the LA Kings, a matchup, a rehashing of our first ever series in franchise history in the playoff back in the 2018 playoffs, which was the sweep of the LA Kings, backstopped by our own Marc-Andre Fleury and now our own Jonathan Quick. It's crazy how those things come full circle. But anyway, with 1 night to go in the NHL, it's still all to play for, especially in the Pacific Division. And really, the Golden Knights control their own destiny, which is what you want at this time of the year. Destiny was out of our hands last year at this time of the year, and it wound up costing us our first playoff, our first missed playoff in franchise history. And so now to have the opportunity to go into Seattle tomorrow night and win the Western Conference and the Pacific Division is a very promising position to be in. And with regards to news and notes within the Golden Knights organization, there's even more positivity. Obviously, Mark Stone has begun skating again in a blue non-contact jersey. Logan Thompson and Aiden Hill are both practicing with the team, which leads me to believe that there's a greater than 0 chance that Logan Thompson takes the net in Game 82 against the Seattle Kraken. Mark Stone, obviously, as I said, is skating. Shea Theodore just threw on a blue non-contact jersey and is going to play, or may not play, tomorrow night against Seattle, but is practicing with the team, and I think he's got an outside chance of being ready for Game 1 of the playoffs. And same situation for Zach Whitecloud. The extent of the injuries he suffered against the Dallas Stars is still kind of unknown, but management, and particularly Bruce Cassidy, seems very optimistic that while he may not be ready for Games 1, 2, maybe even Game 3, he likely will make it back in some capacity for some amount of games during the Golden Knights playoff push. The further the Golden Knights go into the playoffs, the more likely we are to get names back like Zach Whitecloud and, most importantly, Will Carrier, who, as much as I think he might be done for the year, I think if we get to the Cup final this year, he may end up finding his way back into the lineup, and that would be a boost. But imagine you are the Pacific Division or you are the Western Conference, and the team that will have just won either the Pacific Division or the Western Conference, or both, or neither, but is still, strongly in the playoffs. For their first game of the playoffs, they get potentially their number 1 defenseman and their captain, one of their most important players, back. It's like having a free trade deadline all over again. So there's a lot of optimism going around the team, and there's a lot of optimism going into Game 82, which, it's not win or go home, but it's win and control your own destiny. So it's exciting. It's definitely something worth watching, and even though it's at 9:30, I believe, local time here in the central time zone, and it will be incredibly late, I'm definitely staying up. I'm not going to miss it for the world, especially if the Golden Knights are able to lock in not only 1, but potentially 2 banners to hang in the rafters next year. Obviously, I would rather them be Western Conference champion in the playoffs and Stanley Cup champion. Those would be my 2 favorite banners. But hey, banners is as banners does. and it's definitely something that would be indicative of how good a season the Golden Knights had despite all the adversity they've overcome. So there's still a lot of positivity. There's a lot of good things going on, which is really exciting, and we've got a playoff push to cover. So that being said, I'll stop blabbing about Game 81, and I will catch you guys after Game 82.